Hey guys, Thomas the Jr. here, aka Mustache Tom, here to review the movie Onward. And if you end up enjoying this review, then consider joining my Patreon page. Any donations are desperately needed. Alrighty then, with that out of the way, let's talk about Onward. Before I get in deep into it, it is pretty surprising to finally see Disney try, with the help of Pixar, to actually make their own little movie here. Out of, all the reboots that have been going on, out of all the remakes, all of whatever you want to call them, again, it is really refreshing to see Disney, again, with the help of Pixar, which makes total sense, to, again, finally literally move onward. So I think that title is very on brand uh, in terms of what I think everyone wanted Disney to do for quite some time, and that's again start to shift back into trying to tell their own stories. Because boy, they have not been doing that for a really long time. I want to say their last original movie was probably Lilo and Stitch, I think. I don't even remember, man. Because Frozen's based off of a story, Tangled's based off of another story. I'm trying to think of other Disney movies that came out. Big Hero 6, but that was also Pixar. Yeah, like the last Disney movie, like Disney, I think was Lilo and Stitch. So again, with the help of Pixar, they're finally be able to tell their own story. Again, enough gushing over about that. Let's talk about the actual movie. So the movie begins with narration. And the narration discusses how in this world there used to be all this mystical energy, and the world was filled to the brim with magic. And as time went on in this world, eventually someone discovered technology, and through that, magic was shortly removed. So, immediately, before I can go even any further, uh, we've seen this premise, done with real people, I guess, or situations of like, oh, that technology, it's gonna take over stuff. We've heard that tale a many of times, but on the other hand, it was kind of refreshing to see this sort of, the best way I can describe it, as a very Dungeons and Dragons based world, and seeing how creatures of a more mystical realm would handle what would happen if technology came into their world. Um, so yeah, uh, we see them advance, um, and we start off with our two elf brothers, Ian and Barley. Ian being the younger brother and Barley being the elder brother. They have their mom, which she's like looking after them, and then she's currently dating this cop minotaur guy. Uh, so Ian's birthday was today, and they were celebrating it. And as he's getting ready to head for school, he bumps into this guy because he's like, oh, I couldn't get anything to eat. So he bumps into some random guy who knew his dad. And he's trying to ask more questions about his dad because his dad passed away. So Ian writes, as he's like making his way back to school, a to-do list of things he wants to achieve, either on his own or whatever. So he volunteers to drive, or he's trying to like learn how to drive into the highway, and he fails to do so. He does not know how to merge with, you know, getting in there. So, uh, he goes to the school and he's like, "Oh, I'll just invite all these random people to my party." Uh, but Barley comes over with his van, the van you see on the poster at the bottom there, and Ian is all like, "Oh, no, no, no party, never mind." So he goes home and he X's out the entire list because he's assuming that none of those things on the list are going to happen. So he goes to his room and starts listening to the last tape he had of his dad. Uh, he sees uh, this old shirt that the dad had and asks them about it. And to, you know, give something since it was still the birthday, she says that she's going to give both of them a gift. So she goes to get something. So after they retrieve the item, the wizard item, Ian copies the narration. So the narration at the beginning was completely unnecessary. And by the way, just, I guess, spoiler alert for the head, they copy the narration a third time at the end of the film, so I think he could have cut at least one of those out, the beginning one, preferably. And Bailey keeps trying the spell. He has the staff, and he learns about the spell to bring their dad back for one day. So Bailey was the one trying the spell all day, and then Ian is like, "Oh man, I'm just gonna do whatever." And then he has the staff with him. He reads it, and it pops off. But it takes way too much energy, and only the legs appear from the waist down. So you're freaking out. And after they think they can restore the rest of him, but they need a gem of some sort, the MacGuffin of the movie. So Barley shows that the little game that he's obsessed over is real, and that there's a tavern that they can go to, so they want to see this through. And the mom, after the fact, sees that they are gone. All the while they are traveling, Ian is trying to attempt to do some more magic. So the area they go to is this tavern, and the tavern now is this like happy birthday place. It's completely changed. So I believe her name was Corey the Minotaur, or Manticore, I should say. Sorry, and she's talking about how, you know, it's too risky to go on an adventure like this. So they eventually convince her to change her ways by showing her, like, hey, you used to be like that. So she closes the tavern and kicks everyone out. And then in the process, the building catches on fire. So Ian sees that the legs of the dad are in trouble, so he manages to get the levitate spell, the spell he was trying to work at earlier, finally goes off. So they go to they're looking to go to a place called Raven's Point, and they're trying to discuss the best way of going there. Ian wants to take the easy way, the highway, and Barley wants to take the long way called the Path of Peril. And they start by taking the easy way. So the mother is worried, so she calls the Manticore cop. And, you know, she's like getting ready with him. But the car ends up like stopping. Their car, Ian and Barley's car. And Ian's the one who suggests using magic. But Ian is distracted by Bailey, so he ends up casting the spell on Bailey instead. So Ian heads off to find some gas, does so, and they're struggling to just get to the gas station. As all of these little pixies are there, they're these bikers now because they can't fly, because they haven't used their wings in so long. So they became bikers, and they're very rude. They just take things. Um, so this movie does a very interesting perspective of like how you look at certain mystical creatures again. Unicorns, as another example, are all feral. All the ones we see in the movie, anyway. Um, so, anyways, they get back in the car and they messed with the bike, so the pixies are after them. And then they're driving off, so they're getting chased. So Ian uses the cooling system, because earlier in the movie he turned it on. It was very powerful, so he's able to blow all the pixies away. So they are unfortunately stopped by these two. I think it was either 2 or 3 cops. So they talk about and decide to use a disguise spell, and they disguise themselves as the cop, the Bronco cop. That was his name, Bronco. Sorry. So when Ian lies, the disguise itself starts to fade away. So they're trying to keep up with either like asking a question with a question, or telling the truth in some sort of fashion without actually telling the truth. However, the cop eventually mentions Barley being a screw up, and Ian actually ends up, saying, no, that's not true. It ends up being that the disguise fades further away, which makes Ian freak out. So they drive off, and now Barley is upset, and they eventually stop, and Ian's trying to explain himself. And as the two are sort of arguing, the music was on, and we suddenly see, abruptly, the dad's legs are dancing, and they see that he's a terrible dancer. They start dancing with the legs. So Barley is talking about now how he's never had a chance to, make a decision. It's always been Ian. Whenever he had the decision, it would be his decision versus Barley's decision, and would end up always going to Ian. So he finally gives the chance to Barley, as he was complaining about never getting that chance. And I know that feeling all too well. Asking for a chance on YouTube and never getting it, I know that feeling all too well. So, meanwhile, the mom is still worried, so she goes to this shop with the Manticore. She eventually ran into her. And they eventually go into the shop, and they're both talking to this shopkeeper, and then the Manticore stings her, and they grab the Manticore's sword. Now the reason the mom gained her as an ally, and then the Manticore talked about how if they unleashed the gem, the MacGuffin, it will come with a curse. So they're both going to the adventure. So anyways, as they're going to the path of peril, the cop also finds the path because one of the vehicle's parts fell off. And they come upon a cavern. So they cast another spell, and it doesn't seem to go off this time. So, Ian makes, because there's just this cavern that they've come up to. So Ian, he's supposed to believe that the bridge is there. So he falls the first time. The brother has the rope, and he catches him and pulls him back up. He casts it again. The bridge works. He pretty much almost makes it all the way across. He looks back to see the brother no longer have the rope. He lets go. Ian, almost falls. He catches himself at the end of the other side. He drops the bridge. So Barley points out that there's this raven pointing to this location. And as they are traveling still, the cops arrive. So they get back in the car, and Ian drives off, and now they're being chased by the cops. So Barley, with them ending in this little, a dead end, the best way to describe it, Ian's trying to do the most powerful spell, but he can't do it yet. So Barley sends his car careening into the edge of the rocks, which causes it to collapse on the car, and the cops are trapped on the other side. So they keep following the trail up to the last clue, which gives them this little tablet thing with the curves and an X, which is like they think it's the treasure. So they see that they could go down the raft of this water in this cavern. So they use, the brother Barley had all these chips. They cast a few spells on the chips, or one of them, making it into a boat and then speeding it up. So the mom, as she's driving, bumps right into one of the pixies, and we cut right back to very promptly Barley mentioning, because throughout the movie he's been talking about these 3 memories, and he finally opens up to this first bad memory that he had, and that was that he couldn't say goodbye to his dad. His dad, as they talked about at some point earlier in the movie, had gotten sick, and Barley couldn't, gain that courage to say goodbye to somebody in that site. And to relate to that, I know that feeling. I knew for a while when my grandma was getting old, that she needed help and stuff like that. So it became like tougher and tougher for me to want to see her, because I didn't like seeing her like that in that sort of state. But I eventually myself gained the courage to do so. I know that feeling all too well. And, I had that moment as well. So I know that moment, and I know other people have that moment as well. So, this movie definitely has that sort of Pixar quality to it, having that moment of they're never really afraid to venture into that territory of bad things happen, and dealing with those subjects of death and actually talking about it. Whereas Disney has kind of, when it's alone, has kind of avoided that subject for a while, it seems. So, anyways, so as they're in this cavern, they unleash some traps, and throughout the movie, or earlier in the movie, Barley was talking about this cube, this gelatinous cube that's very threatening, and it finally is revealed, and we see it in action, being able to just evaporate whatever is sucked into it. So they end up unleashing all the traps, which one includes this water trap, and they use the dad to like sink to the bottom and then open up the top portion of it because the water is filling up. They pull the dad up after accessing the top, and they open the crate to see that it's actually a sewer crate. I think that's what it's called, a crate, the circular thing that leads into the sewer. Anyways, it actually leads them back to the school. So they think that their journey, or at least Ian does, he thinks that their journey was absolutely for nothing. They went in a big circle. So Ian is back to being upset with Barley. So Ian goes off with the dad, and Barley ends up going back to this well. And we saw the cop pulling up the moment where Barley went up to the well earlier in the movie, and he's like talking about the good old times of like how things used to be. So the brother's trying to figure out what the clue, the little tablet thing, was for. And all the while, Ian is going through the memories of like what he had gone through on this little adventure. So after that, he starts checking off his little checklist, and he starts to realize that all of the things that he had wanted to do were accomplished either in this journey particular or even earlier. It shows even earlier flashbacks that we didn't see before. So he runs back to get back to Barley, and Barley, in the meanwhile, puts the MacGuffin in the little place that he's in. It fits perfectly, and it unleashes the crystal. But of course, as mentioned earlier, this also lets out the curse. So this dragon is formed from various parts of the building, the school building, and as well as the school mascot build part, which is a dragon face, oh so conveniently. And right at that time, the Manticore and the mom arrive, and the brothers run off, because they're trying to do the spell. So Ian's casting the spell, and the mom is distracting it with the sword and stabs the dragon, able to hold it back. And more of it it's going a little bit slow to form their dad. And the dragon is like powering its way back up to them. So Ian sees this constantly, and he decides that he's going to distract the dragon as well, because otherwise the dragon is going to get to them. So he says to Barley, this is your chance to say goodbye, because of the memory he finally shared of not being able to say goodbye. So Ian uses a various amounts of spells to distract the dragon, and he is struggling, even as far as to have the wand break at some point. And he had a splinter of like the wood, so even having a small shard of it allowed him to summon it right back to him. So he gets tossed the sword. He uses the levitate sword to levitate the sword to inside the dragon, and we see that is able to finish the dragon off. But Ian is like blocked off, and the mom and the Manticore are like even further back. So Barley gets to have this solo moment, and we see it in the distance, so we don't know what they're saying, but we totally know what they're saying, because Barley mentioned something earlier about wizard names, and how the wizard names are like always cool and stuff. He's also had talked about, again, the bad memory. So even though we don't hear it, we know exactly the two things he's going to say. And, in fact, Barley comes back, and he shares the name that the dad had. I totally forgot what it was, but they think it's lame. And then he hugs Ian for the both of them. And it goes right back to the narration. Um, and the tavern that we saw earlier is back in action. Uh, they brought some of the old school back with the new school, so they kind of converged it, which I think is a really cool way of doing that. And then Ian talking to his students about their adventure, and Barley getting a new truck and them driving it off. And that was Onward. Pretty solid. I really enjoyed the movie. Again, as I mentioned, it is pretty typical that we get like, again in the real world, technology, is taking away something from us. We have, become less because of it specifically. And in this case, it's magic. To compare it to the real world, we have magic, and it's still, it's sleight of hand, it's all of that stuff, it's illusions, it's mind reading, it's all of that stuff. And that stuff still exists. It's out there. We have new ways of going about it now, as far as I know. So, it is interesting to see how things evolve with technology. And in this case, again, dealing with very Dungeon and Dragon-like creatures, seeing how they deal with how technology will change them. Feral unicorns, pixies that get all bikered up, manticores that become very, I guess, calm is the best way I can, just going into the job. Minotaurs becoming lazier. Elves going to school. I guess I don't know with the brothers, but exploring various different creatures and seeing how the world would affect them is sort of this backdrop to the main story of they're going on this adventure to have that moment with their dad, and that's all they wanted to do, is have that final moment. So it's a pretty powerful movie, and I thought when I first heard, how technology would take over, I thought this movie was going in a completely different direction. And I thought I was going to hate this movie because of that direction, because I've never really been a fan of that trope of, like, technology has completely ruined us. And in fact, as I mentioned at the end, with the tavern specifically, we see it sort of, like, mixed. And I actually do like that little bit. It actually is a refreshing take on how we actually operate in the real world. It's not that we completely let go of the past. I mean, parts of it, sure, that's going to happen naturally. Parts of the past are going to fade. And that sort of has I guess, a thread to the connection with the dad. The dad is a part of their past specifically, and they don't want to just let that go. They want to have that final moment with their dad. So I think that thread is very integral to this movie. It says that, again, parts of the past are going to fade. And that's okay, because we're still going to have other parts, the good parts. If we don't allow the good parts of our past to fade, then things will work out fine. As we can see through the tavern, things will find a neat and interesting balance. And I think that's something we can sometimes lose track of very easily, because it's either one. It seems to be there was a very long time, from what I could see on Twitter and other YouTube stuff, it was either one extreme or the other. It was like either technology is ruining us, or technology is the best at everything. Either one of those extremes. And I like this little balance of like, no, there are parts of the past we can hold on to, and then technology also helps us. Having houses over our heads, the basic necessities, like things like that. Uh, you know, uh, the way we can communicate with each other online now. Um, that can have a diverging path. It's not necessarily a good or a pure evil. It's a diverging in between, as it were. Um, and I'm pretty sure there are other elements that are out there that are either have been lost or have sort of maintained over time. So I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I thought the two connecting stories were really solid. It really connected in a way that made a lot of sense. Really enjoyable. Had the little heartfelt moment. The movie contains itself pretty solidly through that journey with the brothers. And we could check in with the mom every so often. And we have her moment to shine later in the movie as well. So yeah, really enjoyable. Definitely check it out if you haven't seen it. Because I say that because I want there to be more movies like this, more movies that explore something that isn't based on a story, like, as I mentioned, like Frozen is based on a story, Tangled was, so on and so forth. Anyways, 8 out of 10, really enjoyable. Check it out. Show Disney that it should continue on this path, with or without Pixar, etc., etc. If you ended up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description when I'll head over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are desperately needed, and until next time, everyone, bye-bye!